I'm your chair for this second panel, this afternoon panel on Maroon Legacies and Impact on Contemporary Jamaican and Caribbean Culture. And we are going to be hearing from our 4 presenters. And we will go in the order that they appear on the program. So we'll have Gamma Gloria Sims from the Maroon Women's Network, doing some formidable work across the island and internationally. Miss Beverly Carey, who is a Maroon herself, a researcher and author, and we heard in the previous panel reference to her. In fact, an honor for her as one of the most experienced Maroon researchers in the room. So we are eagerly waiting to hear from her. Also, Chief Sidney Bartley, cultural expert and consultant, one who has worked very much within the Ministry of Culture, Culture, Entertainment, Gender and Sport, and previous iterations of that ministry. So a cultural worker at heart. We're pleased to have him on this panel. And of course, Alex Moore Minot, who is a Mayal priest from Moortown, former Minister of Foreign Affairs for the sovereign state of Akampong, and one who I have heard speak in very, very profound ways. He is a man of wellness at heart and someone rooted in knowledge of our herbs and spiritual practices. So I want to just have us hear from each of our speakers, Gloria Sims, Beverly Carey, Sidney Bartley, and Mayal priest Alex Moore Minot, in that order. Thank you. Oh, I didn't introduce myself, but I try never to do that. I'm Sonia Stanley Nayo, Director of the Center for Reparation Research and a Senior Lecturer in Cultural Studies here at the University of the West Indies.
Yes, speaking on Maroon legacy and the impact on contemporary Jamaica and the Caribbean culture. And one of the space I want to speak from is Maroon and family life. And it's a passion of me, because as Professor Beckles has said, that Jupiter keep running back because he left family. So we are very mindful of family, even though we run into the hills and whatever, but we are very mindful of the successful generation. Without that, then the legacies died. So we have to, and that's why we're here, trashing out things so that we can leave a legacy for the next generation. And a lot of these things that we are experiencing will be, we want to eliminate it in our time so that the next generation don't have to go through this, because that is how our African people are. They run away from the plantation and join those that were free out there, and they try their best to keep a life that their children could inherit, and whatever, in their negotiation, it was for a successful generation. As I would always say, family life cannot be preserved unless you have land, and our people know that property and land was very important to African people here, that was here. And so they fought hard in order to preserve their history. They have to have land space to do it. Without land, there is no plan. Land and plan go together. When you look at the wider Jamaican society, those that were turned off of the estate, we see family life in shambles. Why? Because they didn't get property when they were turned off. There was no rehabilitation for what they have been through. And so these sick mind African, now sick mentally in their mind from the trauma that they have experienced and have witnessed directly and indirectly that was happening to our people. Turn off of the estate without no place, No place of abode. Even till today, when they try to settle in the land that they were born, they are called names like squatters. No, and sometimes if you discriminate yourself, you get no fixed address. And all these terms that our people get, even though they are in the land where they were born, and there's many land unoccupied that we pass every day for years, and our family would say they know these land to never occupy. Some of them only have one cow on them. People own them, and they're well fenced up. If you're going to St. Anne's, you see some nice land, all fenced up with just one cow on it. It is property that is owned still by the slave master children. They come here every year. Even the Great House, you have great-grandchildren. I've done a research in Trelawney. When they did the Paul Bogle hymn search, me and a brother from St. Thomas. And when we go to Trelawney, round by Good Hope, those great houses round there, many of them is still owned by, still visited and still owned by the grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Just like how we are here, inheriting our ancestor heritage, the slave master children is still coming back to the Great House in Jamaica up to today. I was shocked when I go there and find out. I find a helper there, a black woman in apron, well dressed in apron, in the house. So we know that these things exist here still in Jamaica. These slave masters. Many times you might see a white man and you're trying to, a young fella, you're trying to talk to him. You know, we Jamaican, when we see white people, many of us would go to them speaking with accent to them. And these are some white young ones here who talk patois better than we. Because right here, them grow up, they are not no foreigner here. You know? We were enslaved mostly by the Portugal Jews, who was seeking settlement in England at the time. And when they hear about the new land, they came here. And we were enslaved by Portugal Jews in Jamaica. And if you don't mind, the Jews is still a strong family lineage here in Jamaica. They still have land. I grew up in St. Thomas on a property that was 200,000 acres worth of land, owned by one person and one family. You know? So the slave master is sometime, and even when we sometimes try to tackle England, British, they will go around us because they know many of the slave master that was here was not British. They wasn't British looking settlement. Most of them were Jew. And they were looking settlement there. They didn't get it at the time. The new world turned up and there was land here for the grab. And they come here and they grab many land. You know, nowadays they ask you for title. Many of those land maybe don't even have titles neither. It was land that was given as grant for various things. You know, Jamaica was up for the grab. It was given as grant to many people. Many of them they don't even have title, but you have to do a big research in this country to find out which and which land don't even really have a title. It was only given as land grant. You understand? It's not just the Maroon. Why they coming after the Maroons who fought blood, sweat, and tears to have their property. There were many who have acres, many acres of land, bigger than even what was given to the Maroon, even though we are a nation of people. One person get land that was more than what was given to Maroons here in this island, and still have it, and still is partaker. Their great-grandchildren is still partaker of these properties, you know? And as I begin my story talking about family life cannot preserve without land. And because the Maroon was so mindful of land, knowing that without land you cannot have families established and concrete, you know, strong, and so they got land. And in Jamaica today, when you look around, family life is preserved by the Maroon. I always say one of the best preservative that sometimes Maroon don't speak about. They talk about the food, the dance, the music, and everything is family life. Because family was the institute that transatlantic slave destroyed intentionally. And so family life was preserved by the Maroon, that group, this group, our group, our ancestor preserved family life. In the wider Jamaica society, when you look around, families only gather through funerals. When there's a funeral is when they have family reunion. The Maroon has family reunion every year. It is not something that we do because of a funeral. It is the gathering like 6th of January when everyone come back to their lot or their land, regardless of what foreign country you are in. He doesn't have to announce. He doesn't have to go through any announcement for once to know that the 6th of January you head to Jamaica, you head to Accompong, and you will see the retention of our culture. You will see families getting together. Our land is where we bury our ancestors, our grandmothers. And so that was the center to pull the family back together. You would come back, they would do ceremonies. Somebody would maybe buy a goat and you kill a goat at your grandmother's graveside, and everybody talk about their grandmothers who don't know her would learn of her from the elder and whatever. She's buried on the land. In the wider Jamaica society, no matter how much you pay for land, it is illegal to bury your dead on the land, which is not good. This is not an African culture. You brought the land for many $1,000s, but you can't bury it dead. You still have to plan to buy a spot in the cemetery. In our country, in our Maroon town now, you have every ancestor buried in their lot and their land, and you could return, you could learn of your grandparents that you never know from who is there, you know, and you could have a grand reunion. This is outside of funeral. When we look in Jamaica now, it's just funeral that is bringing family reunion. It shouldn't be. It wasn't like that. This is not our culture to only gather when somebody died, but it's something that is learned in Jamaica, because the only gathering at the time going through transatlantic slave trade that you were allowed to go to was a funeral. So at many funeral was when we the Maroons, if we attend those funeral, we would plan where it would be the next uprising. This is where we make our plans as to what next we would do, because that's the only occasion that you would get to see your uncle that live on the next property, or you maybe come across a cousin that they had moved from one plantation to the other. So you could make plans of how you're going to meet, what you're going to do, how you're going to attack the enemy, which great house you're going to burn down next. Was at funeral that they would do these things. So that was what funeral was for the Maroon, to plan their next move, what to do. Not a family reunion. But this is what is happening now. So I'm saying,
just asking you to wrap up.
Yes, in this time. You know, another thing, again, I'm just going to brush this slide, is going through the Caribbean and making connection with those that have moved from Jamaica into other Caribbean area. When I went into Cuba, I was called there by the Voodoo people. There were people that's in Santiago, that is their grandparents from way back, and they are part of the Cuba, but they come through Haiti. And after Haiti downfall, they went into Santiago and Cuba. When I go into Brazil, the Congo spirit of Congo, people that is here, those that you see in St. Thomas with the Kumina and so, the Congo spirit was there. I myself know the Congo spirit because I was born in a small place in Wakesfield coming out of Flagstaff area known as Congo Town. So the Congo spirit is there in Brazil, and I don't know the language, but we could interact through the spirit there. Suriname, the same thing. There's a history of Suriname, 900 and had people moving from Suriname to Jamaica way back in the history of the slave trade. So our people is so connected. Jamaican, when you left out here, out Jamaica to go to other countries, you see the connection of the places that Jamaican go to help to bring revolution and all these things all over the Caribbean, and it's very touching to go and witness these things. Bless up.
So we're going to move to Miss Beverly Carey. Yes?
I really haven't prepared, but I think I have enough that I could touch a few things that I would like to. Number one, the magazine I spoke about, which has the head of the king of the home, is self-description is Gentleman's Magazine. It was the court magazine issued in London. I think it stopped about 1732, so it will be the period before. And those of you, I'm almost 87, and I'm looking around and encouraging researchers to rise up behind me or alongside me and take over and carry on the research. So that is a little area that you need to research as to what was, because one of the things that came out in the discussion of the home thing is that the West African kingdoms at the time of the British, maybe even the Portuguese period, when they realized that they wanted to transport their people abroad, because you do realize that slavery in Africa was different from how it was expressed in the Caribbean. They said to them, keep the slaves here, and I will allow you to agree to work the plantations. And there were some plantations, I think, around is it Baita Benin? Not by here, maybe. And there were some islands there, and in fact, Portuguese Jews did, in fact, cultivate them. But what I wanted to say is that the Maroon thing the history is extremely complex. And you go down one road and it leads you to a myriad other places. And it's a pool that is so deep, there's no end to it. And I just want to touch on a few things. If you want to talk about contemporary impact of the Maroons, the most significant thing is actually jerk. And this thing, in my opinion, because some of this is my own personal research and my own interpretation, is that the jerking started with the Carib people. One of the earliest of the places where it is shown is on an island of Western Hispaniola. And there is a lady who came to Jamaica at the time of the governor. Anyway, it is 1801 kind of period. And it's new, was it? No, it's not. I better not call her name because I might not be remembering too well. But anyway, she came to visit her husband, who was a seaman. He came with him, seaman traveling on the boats that carried merchandise from England. And the boat stopped off Hispaniola at this small island where they were more or less kidnapped. And she saw the jerk pork going on in the island. Now, jerking is not done in Haiti anymore, as far as I know. But then in about the 1590s, it is shown in the Spanish documents as a very serious product of Jamaica. And it spread, I put it down, that it was carried to Boston Harbor. There's a little bay there. And the main ingredient was pimento bush, and in terms of cooking and seasoning it, and there was sea salt and a lot of pepper around that area. So a culture developed there, and that culture is related to buccaneers and to the earliest of the Maroon people. Some Amerindians, some of them black, because black people did not jerk in Africa. They cook their stuff on a spit. And so jerking is the most important thing. But what is sad to say is that it has been captured. And this is a very significant point, that a lot of our culture is captured. I have had many experiences where, starting in the 70s, where I tried to persuade the Motown Maroons to hold on to the culture. If films are being done, get the footage, set up a library, own it. And of course, I had a lot of flack and various discrimination, when I tried to insist that the copyright of all of these cultural things should remain with the Maroons. So right now, jerking, there is a corporation, or a number of corporations are put together, and they've developed this idea of Jamaican jerk. And you cannot go abroad and call jerk Jamaican if it is not produced and marketed through this company. And I have said to this gust of people that they should be giving us even a 1% of the profit, because it's a culture. It started with the Amerindian, but it was the culture bearer is the African Maroon. That's who sustained it over 300 years until it spread into the Jamaican region about somewhere around the 1980s. So that, as far as jerk is concerned, and the impact is really jerk. And you all know that is true. That is about the most universal of the cultural items that come out of the Maroons. That is the one that has the greatest impact worldwide, because it's in all the cuisine. Okay? Now, I just want to mention one other thing. Jews. It is without, it is true that the Jews, the young people, Jewish young people, helped Maroons a lot. You see, the people that came here were substantially Portugals. They're Portuguese Jews, but they were called Portugals because in the time of the Inquisition, they had to practice their religion in secret. And they were Portuguese Jews, so they called them Portuguese. I say Portuguese, you say Portugals. So the Portugals came to Jamaica, and they were very discriminated against, and they could not hold more than a certain amount of land. They couldn't hold more than so many slaves. And they were, by law, absolutely prohibited from settling together in their own town. They call it ghetto. The law said, from England, said that they must not allow them to settle. They want them to intermix a little here and there. Because, the Jews are very clan-like. I say that. And whatever happened, they're going to get together, help each other, and before you know it, they will be the people who are above you. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact that when the Maroons in Portland and St. Thomas were actually in the First Maroon War, it is these youths, they forged the document of public officials so the Maroons could get passes to go in the market. And they bought the powder and the shot and gave it to the Maroons. So they had a role. And one of the reasons, possibly, though we like to think about the Marranos thing, we must not absolutely buy into the dialogue of the Europeans, because they're not nice, by and large. There are exceptions always. But they will talk about Marranos and the pig because it is degrading. But how about Maroon? And if you look at the horrible book by Edward Long, you'll find Maroon is what he thinks the Maroons should be called, or they were called originally Maroons, which is the same name which was used for the Portugals when they were practicing their religion in secret. So that takes care of that one. The next one I want to mention is land. Well, I have one opinion. Chief Curry is fighting the battle for sovereignty. And I guess we all are fighting the battle for sovereignty. And I say to myself, there are plenty several kingdoms all over Jamaica. How about a hotel with a mile of frontage? You think any policeman is going to go down there and tell them to force open the gate, boy? No, they're not going to. They're all sovereign kingdoms. It's only that we don't think like that. So, it is perfectly normal the Maroons should consider themselves having a kingdom and a sovereign place of their own, because they're just like every other commercial person in that respect. So the next thing I want to mention is the question of Golden Veil, perhaps, or maybe I'll go to the stories first. We have plenty different ethnicities or kingdoms that came to Jamaica. The Moors are mentioned. They are the Dahomey people speaking the Papaw language, and a lot of them are affiliated with the Maroons, especially in eastern Jamaica. I can think of 2 settlements called Wider. One of them was in the St. Margaret's Bay, and the other one was up in the Parkmount area. And all of them carried a culture, they carried a language. The Maroons would always pretend, even some of the leaders of the parties who were black, like Sambo is a famous one, and Phillips, would always say they don't speak Papaw, but they are perfectly, speak Papaw perfectly. I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. But anyway, and other languages, because the Maroons were speaking Cremanti. But they would pretend this because they are Maroons themselves. These 2 leaders I'm talking about, Sambo, and Sambo became a senior person in the administration of Moortown at a later date. Sambo and they were slaves, or they were enslaved people. And they pretended this because they would believe in the troops away from the Maroon village. You understand? And away from us, they would be hiding those who are free from Papaw or Wider or whatever, the Dahomey people. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is the question of the music. My family, by my DNA, I come from the open spaces between Ivory Coast and Ghana. And some of the stories, my clan is the Fuller clan, okay? Come from Cornwall Barracks, a place called Cotterwood. And Cotterwood is a place where it was one of the secondary places. It was active during the war, maybe not called Cotterwood because there were warriors' stamping ground up there. But when the war got very hot and Nannytown was being burned down and Nanny spread to Cotterwood, one of the places is Cornwall Barracks, and that is where the Cotterwood River is, and then it goes right across. That is Junker Mountain, but Nannytown is Blue Mountain. So I'm talking about. Yes, I'm telling you about the stories. So we were told a number of stories. I will be shortly done. They told a lot of stories which have songs in African language. And by the time my grandma is telling me this is about 1944, but she was born in 1883. So a lot of the language, she's losing it and she's improvising. And this one is particular, it's called Vam Vam Vaga Vaga Vam. And it's about a little boy. And he comes from that area, the open lands. And his mother has 20 children, of which he has eaten 19, according to him. And one is left with him, and he's very fine foot, very thin, tidy. And he's running, pardon me, and along the trail he's running, he meets different animals in the forest. And that way, we're learning what the animals of the African forest area is compared to other areas in Africa. And he sings, and he tells, he's not singing actually. What happens, he meets an animal. Let us say he meets the horse, and tells the horse, little boy says, little boy, why are you running so? And the little boy says, my mother had 20 of us picnic, and she caught and ate 19 of us, and he's running after me to catch me and eat me also. Deer was shocked. He shoved the little boy, he showed little boy the horns on his head and said, don't run another step, just stand behind me. When your mother comes to us, I will hit her with my great horns and throw her right back to Timbuktu, when she will never bother you again. And in that story, in the written form, my grandmother would then go into, because you're going to have to explain, so you go into an explanation as to what Timbuktu was. And the song goes, Vam, vaga, 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 vam, Vam, vaga, 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 vam. Woman, weary, oh, woman, weary, oh, woman, weary, oh. Deer tossed up his head and said to the boy, what is that sound? The boy said, it is my mother's breast, sir. And of course, the reason why, because they were not wearing brassieres. And the breast is, she's fed 19 children in a natural way. The breast is hanging all the way down here. And many of the statues we see, small statues we see of Africa in the African women and depicted in the old days, did show those pendulous breasts, small ones. And so he's frightened by the sound, so he kicks up his back legs, and off he goes and leaves the little boy. And so the little boy goes on, and the story describes to you meeting the horse, and the horse does what? When he's ready to run, he makes his sound, whatever, and off he goes. And so you're learning along the way. And then eventually, after many, many meeting of different animals who react the same way, little boy comes, and there's a scorpion, and the scorpion stops him and says, little boy, where are you running? Scorpion tells the same story. My mother ate 19 of us, and I am the only ones left. And he said, stand right beside me. I'm going to take care of your mother for you. I said, you saw a little bit. We saw elephant, we saw giraffe, we saw horse, we saw deer, all of them. And nothing has helped. Vam baga vaga vaga voom, van baga vaga vaga voom, woman weary oh, woman weary oh. That is the woman's breast, and she's singing. She's tired. Woman weary oh. And of course the boy gets ready to run because he knows that the scorpion cannot. He says, stand up right there. And when the woman comes up and she stretches her hand to grab the leg, I gave her one sting right in her leg, and she dropped down dead. Little boy begins to cry. What happened to my mother? So what happened there is that he says, you miss your mother? All right. So he just gave the mother another sting, and the mother came back to life and hooked up the little boy, realized what she was going to lose, and goes home and takes care of the little boy. And I'll just give you one other example quickly, and it is about sorry. Come, sorry. This one is very significant because what I'm trying to show you is a variety. This comes from my clan. When I go to Moortown, nobody has ever heard it. But we have it repeated to us throughout our childhood. And then I asked my grandmother 20 years later, and she gives me every detail the same. Anyway, sorry is about my farmer of the African variety who is married to an Amerindian, possibly Tana woman on Jonker Mountain. And she is a witch, or she's not a witch, but she's a mystical woman, able to do certain magic. And she takes out guinea corn, introduced the guinea corn, was one of the corn produced in Jamaica in the old days, brought from Africa, and it fed, a lot of the Maroons fed on guinea corn. And there were guinea hens as well. The corn was fed to guinea hens. And so she sings, she goes out with 2 hampers and a donkey, and the hampers are packed with guinea corn. She's going to sell it in St. Thomas because she comes from the border between St. Thomas and Portland. The Blue Mountain divides St. Thomas to the south and Portland to the north. And so there's a pass called, there's Kuna Pass, but there is also Puss. What is it called, Colonel? What is it called? Puss. Corn Puss Gap. That's a guinea horn. Corn Puss Gap. And corn is so important in the culture of the Maroons, especially the Amerindian Maroons. There are a whole lot of places. Corn River, Corn Husk River, which is when the corn is shelled at the top of the river on near Gun Barrel Hill. It is dropped in the river and it washes down. And there are other places up there which have the corn name. So we can use the names and we can tell you the culture of the Maroons. But anyway, she went out with her hamper and the man and the donkey. And when she reached a particular point, which was described as Johnson Mountain, described with a huge rock on it. And when she went there, she began to sing, Sari, Sari, come, Sari, come, Sari, come, Sari, come, Sari. I'm losing my voice. Anyway,
All right, so that's a place to pause, and then we give some time for questions.
let me just, the thing of the story is quite simply that she was calling Syria the guinea birds, the guinea hens in the air, and she calls them down, and while she's singing, she changes her clothing in feathers. And she's able to dance, and she does this for a number of time. Then the farmer husband puts ashes in the hamper and is able to trail her to a particular point on the mountain. And eventually he finds out, he learns the song. He's a fiddleman of great talent, learns it, and when she's least expecting it, and she has come home with her line story, he just takes out his fiddle, he plays the tune and causes her to change into the other form, and then he just picks up his rifle and puts her to rest. But the main thing is this. When I became a Maroon researcher, I wanted to know if there was a place called Johnson Mountain.
Same time.
So I went hunting for Johnson Mountain. I had to learn where the borderline between St. Thomas and Portland was. I had to find out where the Cornpus Gap is. And I traveled around and inquired until eventually asking where John found it, Johnson Mountain. I went up into the hills to Johnson Mountain. The first man I saw, is it Johnson Mountain? Yes. Is there a big rock at the top of the hill? He says, yes. And then it turns out to be a group of Maroon families from Moortown. So I made that discovery of that, I call New Maroon settlement, but indeed it was very old, going back to after the treaty. So I'm told to shut up, I'm going to shut up, okay? Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Beverly Carey. So we hear now from Sydney Bartley.
Good afternoon. All protocols observed. For me, the Maroon legacy and the impact on contemporary Jamaican culture is in the area of cultural identity. And I looked, Nettleford had a statement he made about cultural identity, and I'm quoting, "Cultural identity is as fundamental a reality as food, shelter, clothing, and job opportunities. It is not a mere abstract preoccupation. For this reason, cultural action is central to effective social change." Now, the fashioning of cultural identity in the Caribbean has been largely influenced by our history. Our history of enslavement, in many instances, has been largely discussed in its political and social aspects, within which there is focus on plantation economies and the resulting issues of persistent poverty embedded in the devaluation of the African people by Europeans. Yet, what in some instances has missed the consciousness of many of us who interrogate Caribbean pluralism is the reality of cultural identity formation, which is fashioned by and inscribed in the efforts of the overwhelming majority of African and African descendant people to retain their cultural norms and values in a society in which they were faced with brutality and mayhem. In that situation, the very notion of survival or death would have provided cause and effect for the emergence of cultural identity as a platform for survival and triumph. The truth is, there was never cultural homogeneity among the Africans captured and forcibly removed from their families, homeland, and cultures. Rather, culture, as in cultural fusions, as well cultural adaptability, became the anchor not only for survival, but also for the ultimate triumph that would come from a constancy of resistance and war, within which cultural identity consolidation became the foremost bastion of defense. In this reality, our people's cultural journey would be created and measured by the very notion of the road traveled, the decisions made, the relationships formed, outcomes achieved, and an overriding consistent mantra of none shall be left behind. So among the salient outcomes of cultural identity within plantation economies was the emergence of what is called Maroonage and its impact on the society. Restitution in one sense, and the redefinition in another sense of the African identity, internalized and mystified as in Bob Marley's Natural Mystic, and transcribed through forms of retention to ultimately convey the supremacy of the Afro-Caribbean identity. This is why Jamaican and Caribbean cultural, educational, or development policies should not be written without a sense of that history, without understanding that years later, echoes of the past, to quote a part of their compound theme, still reverberate in the present, beckoning us to listen to the voices of Kojo, Nania, Kompong, Kwao, listen to the voices extended to Taki and Sam Sharp and a host of revolutionaries whose primary platform for action in the present is a better future for our people. Jamaican poet Vera Bell describes this experience of looking back very well, and I quote, "Ancestor on the auction block, across the years your eyes meet mine, compelling me to look," unquote. Maroonage became for Jamaica and the Caribbean a reinforcement of the image of the victorious, resilient African identity that continues to redefine and remake itself through various modern contrivances: reggae, dancehall, mento, salsa, merengue, rumba, zouk. Maroonage became the platform on which the story of African resilience in the Caribbean would be told and engendered. To not recognize that is to promote a region in search of itself, a region defined outside of itself. And I remember what Sir Hilary spoke about this morning about foreign to oneself, alienated from oneself, and ultimately reflecting in self-hate, self-destruction, and the kinds of and levels of black on black violence that we continue to experience today. Is it any wonder today that here in Jamaica and across the Caribbean, governments are holding their heads in despair as violence continues to increase in communities, even as Maroon communities continue to experience havens of peace and internal stability? I believe Colonel Sterling has mentioned to me that from 1920 to 2024, he can only remember 5 murders in his community over that period. And he said 4 of them were domestic crimes of passion. And that is happening in a country that murders over 1,000 persons per year. And so something is happening in terms of Maroon impact, or what it could be on our society. The consequence of a society that has defined itself through Eurocentricities, such as seeking European and American models for education and development, within which the African platforms so vitally reflected by Maroon communities continue to be rejected in the proverbial search for solutions. That is perhaps the very notion of dysfunctionality that we continue to experience today. Maroon societies have shown themselves to cater to their own people because their very existence is founded on the powerful imagery of African cultural identity. One of the greatest imagery a Jamaican and Caribbean child should inculcate very early in their education is the image of Chief Kojo, seated in the hills of a compound as the British soldiers come up the hill to sign what I will not refer to as the 1738 Maroon Treaty, but I will refer to as the Treaty of a Compound. Because you see, when big countries war and have treaties, the treaties are connected to the city. So you know the Treaty of Breda in 1667, Ryswick in 1797, the one that ends the American War of Revolution in 1773 was Paris. And so why are we calling it the Maroon Treaty? I invite historians to change that to the Treaty of a Compound, in which the British, for the only time in their history, was forced to sign a treaty with a group of people, establishing them as a self-governing construct alongside them as they govern Jamaica. So James, but we have come this far not only by faith, but by acumen and fierce determination of our ancestral pedigree. James Weldon Johnson, I think, says it very well in his composition of what has come to be known as the Black Anthem of the Americas. And I quote, "Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from a gloomy past, till now we stand at last where the white gleam of our bright star is cast." I put it to us that this stony road has been paved with the blood, resilience, and determination of Maroon warriors who very early made the clarion call for freedom. The confounding of the so-called European military force has been well described in the various Maroon wars in Jamaica. Those enslaved Africans contrived their exit from plantations through expeditious fortitude. Some of them left as lightning bolts, others as pocket rockets, and some ultimately as Olympic hurdlers, as they scaled the plantation barriers when they came to the end of the plantation. And the only thing preventing them from freedom was a fence or a wall. Perhaps it's not surprising that we do so well in those areas. They were able to reestablish their lives and build out their livelihoods, often with the assistance of the Tainos, as well as by being a constant and consistent pain to every plantation and enslaver. These Maroon warriors were able to render the enslavement of African people as a crime for which the Europeans had to pay dearly. So in this regard, the story of Jamaican cultural identity has been formed out of the cauldron of brutality and the inequities of African enslavement, within which the Maroon leads the charge. And so they must be the context of our cultural, educational, and development policies in Jamaica and the Caribbean. The context of all development policies must be created on the platform of our history. The history of the Maroons and the history of the Jamaican African people who moved from victims to victors. When these stories are told, the Maroons of Jamaica must be at the core and center, because they, like Sam Sharp after them, decided that they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. So in other words, when Maroons are at the center of Jamaican and Caribbean policies, there will be deliberate pronouncements that reflect the capacity of the Jamaican and Caribbean people to overcome all obstacles on the road to sustainable development. The history of the Maroons speaks to a people who are rooted and grounded in the knowledge of their history, origin, and culture. The history of the Maroons illustrates for all the importance of memory to the construction of positive cultural identity, as seen in the reality that all Maroon communities have a special day for the people to celebrate their history and culture. The history of Maroons engages us and the personal and collective identity that is founded in land tenure and land rights. Let us not forget that the slogan of Paul Bogle in the Moran Bay Rebellion was liberty of person, liberty of land. Mama G spoke about that. The history of the Maroons tells a story of the supremacy of Afro identity, signaling that African descendant communities need to engage African forms of development and social action as the basis for social reengineering and the promotion of equal rights and justice. African people experience as part of our modern history, yet a history that has not become us, as we have been able to overcome these realities and promote countries in which children and grandchildren of former enslaved are now at the helm of governing these countries. And what a thing has happened. It is a story that places cultural identity at the center of development. But it is a power source for the promotion of peaceful and just communities. The story of the Maroons is ultimately the promotion of Ubuntu. I am because you are. And so in closing, we pause and reflect on Maroon warriors, on their meticulous organization, their grounding in the fertility of Afrocentric social and cultural discourse. As such, in response to the call of Vera Bell's ancestor on the auction block, across the years your eyes seek mine, compelling me to look, we reply with a word from the Zulu lexicon, Sawubona, I see you. I see you, Captain Kojo, Grandi Nani, and all Maroon Buffalo soldiers. I see you through lens defined by and grounded in the ancestral pedigree and the singular example of Jamaica's Maroon heritage. Yes, I see you in the armory you bear that is anchored in resilience and fearlessness, and the determination you have to resolve the issues faced by our people in our contemporary societies. I see you, and I respond in Vera Bell's own words, and I quote, "Ancestor on the auction block, yours was the task to clear the ground, mine be the task to build. La luta continua, salute to the Maroons."
Thank you so much, Sydney Bartley. Over to you, Priest Alex Moore.
Peace and love, everyone. I hope all is well. Thank you for this lovely opportunity. Quite like my elder cousin here, I did not know that I was going to speak here until about half an hour ago. So I have nothing prepared, but when you live a thing, when you eat, sleep, and breathe a thing, you don't really need to prepare. So I'm here to represent the spirituality of my people. And I believe that it is the foundation that everything else that is being discussed here is built on. The spiritual concepts of my people, of our people, are the backbone of the reason why our ancestors fought. The whole reason why they believed in freedom was because freedom was to our ancestors just as important as the 10 Commandments of the Jews. Freedom was that pillar. So just like how Islam has 5 pillars of worship and belief, freedom is one of our pillars of belief and what we believe in. I represent what we know in Jamaica as Mayal. And Mayal is truly the spiritual intersection of all things African and all things Lokona Arawak, the original people of this land. And I think that we must give honor to the first ancestors of this land if we are to go forward. There's a lot of talk about the Africans and we love and respect them, but we must remember the first people to have walked on this soil, because it was because of them why the Maroons knew the land so well, knew the herbs so well. Our esteemed elder here, I have so much love for her, Bev Carey, she spoke of a piece of oral history. And I think that it is a beautiful representation of who we are as a people. It was an African man married to an indigenous Lokono woman. And she was a scientist, a science woman, a Mayal woman. You know, she did her dance, she did her singing, and she used those modalities to call the spirits. And that's what that story was truly about. And we must realize that it was this Mayal tradition, this spiritual tradition, that did two things for us as a people. It tied us together and it tied us to the land. Okay? So, to me, it was Mayal that unified entire Jamaica. And we recognize that the reason why so many different indigenous or spiritual communities have a remembrance of Grande Nanny, for example, is because she was the high priestess. So just as how Chief Kojo was the military man, the military genius, Grande Nanny was the spiritual genius. She was the spiritual head for not just Maroons, but all Jamaicans. This is why today, even in revival circles, where our people were forced to, and I've heard Mama G speak about it a lot, hide our tradition behind Christianity because of oppression, we still have the revival shepherds and leaders, etc., carrying their flocks to a compound, to Moortown celebration time, because Maroon represented not just resistance with gun and powder and bayonet and sword, but resistance through spirituality. So people said, oh, and no disrespect, Chief, but some people say that Grande Nanny did not catch the bullets. She did. She did. And if you know, if you truly know the Mayal power, the power of our spirituality, it would not come as a surprise. And I know that you have seen great things in Scotts Hall, unexplainable things.
My only thing is that a soldier is trained here. And if they know that Nanny will catch a bullet here, you're going to shoot it here.
No, man. We'll talk about that some more. But the unification of us as a people came through the singing, the dancing, through going to these sacred spaces together to pay homage. So we were just in Akompong for January 6th celebration, and after years of going to Akompong, I finally received the honor of going to Old Town. And just to see the ancestors being fed the traditional way, it was moving for me. It moved me greatly. And when I saw the crowd of people there around the feeding of the ancestors, I said, just like what we would say in Rio Grande Valley, conjure seed na last. And for those who know, conjure is the wild yam in the hills. And Colonel Sterling will be able to back me up there. They have the yam seed that eventually forms. That's the conjure seed that drops off, and that way the wild yam keeps on growing. And that is the representation, the simile, or the metaphor of our culture, that though it seems to have come down to nothing, we will be able to raise it up again. I mentioned our spirituality tying us to the land. Well, in particular, we have what we would consider two very sacred spaces in Jamaica. The Blue and Jankra Mountains in the east, where we're from, and the Cockpit Country, where our Western family are from. And what all Maroons will tell you is that there are particular spots, and Elder Carey said it earlier, that she had to chop down this giant stone, this boulder, as it was considered to be a sacred spot. Also, within the leeward section, the western section in the cockpit country, the elders over there will tell you, and I spent a lot of time with them as the Minister of Foreign Affairs under Chief Curry's administration. They will tell you that there are several seal grounds. There are many seal grounds which are the sacred spots of reverence right throughout the cockpit country. And it was because of this I had suggested to Chief Curry when I was serving the people of a compound that he should declare cockpit country sacred land. And I think that this is something that we should all look into as indigenous people. Yes, and yes, we did. Any space that there is pilgrimage to every year, just like Mecca, just like the Wailing Wall, just like all of these places, any space that pilgrimage takes place on a spiritual level is and should be considered holy land, sacred land, regardless of the religious persuasion. And it is only at the time that we start to recognize what our ancestors recognized, that the springs, the rivers, the rocks, the trees, all of these spaces are sacred, that we will really be able to protect our spaces, because the Jews have been mentioned extensively, and what they have relied on is the freedom of religion. And so I also make the call, and I hope that all Maroon leaders will support the abolition of the Obeah Act, right, which is a very corrosive act that was put in place by the British, not in 1760 like it's always said, because I have been following Bev Carey's footsteps and gone deep into research. But the British outlawed our spiritual sciences from as early as the 1720s and the 1730s. And why was that? Because of our wonderful ancestors. Kojo, Nani, Kwao, all of these people who were using spirituality not just as a weapon, but as a means of unification. And finally, I'd like to speak to the treaty a bit. The treaties, as were understood by our ancestors, were not first writings on paper, but sacred blood oaths. We have found references, I think even John Guthrie said that I had to tie up myself in a sacred oath with the Negroes, right? A solemn oath, he said, solemn oath. And he said I had to tie up myself, which was speaking to the principle that we join the blood together. So one may wonder, why is it that our people have been defending this thing for so long? We'll never let it go. We'll never assimilate. It's because it is considered by our people to be sacred and an obligation on which blood was required. Because the problem had caused all of this bloodshed. And so just as how it began, it had to end with blood. And until the day that we realize as a people that all of this work that we're doing now is sacred work, is holy work, and respecting it as such, I don't think we'll ever get anywhere. So maybe with this unity and unification push that we're having now, there needs to be a spiritual dimension. And maybe the chiefs need to consider blood oaths, because if we could swear them with Bakra, we should be able to swear them with ourselves, that we will never ever again disunify, break apart, but we will stand together as one in this struggle and in any other struggle that we have going forward. Peace and love.